On the weekend of July 14th to the 16th, I met up with other BMF staff and volunteers at Mallory Park racing circuit near Leicester at the Bike Bonanza. It was a great weekend full of classic bikes, watching various classes of motorcycles herring around the circuit, an auto jumble, and of course, plenty of crack and banter. On the Saturday, I was lucky enough to chat with road racer Shaun Anderson, officially the BMF's fastest rider, and his dad, BMF Finance Director Howard. Right, well, I'm here with the legend that is Howard Anderson and his son Shaun. So we're just going to get a little bit of information about it because I find this fascinating. Father and son involved in motorcycling, racing, TT, all the rest of it. Where should we start? Dad, where did your life on two wheels start?
My life on two wheels started because my mum and dad didn't drive at all, and I discovered motorcycling totally illegally as a 12-year-old, and got this feeling that with the wind through your hair at about 60 mile an hour on a James Captain that there was nothing in the world was ever going to match it, and I felt like that way about motorcycling ever since, you know. And then I got involved with a guy that did a bit of racing, and I did more and more and more with Raymond, and over the years, over 25 years, I was there at the Manx and the TT doing the fuel and helping with so many other things, and when Shaun and his sister came along, they were encouraged, rightly or wrongly, to be on motorcycles from no age. His sister decided to opt out, whereas Shaun just kept on going and enjoyed it, and that was what it was all about. That was why he didn't race as a kid. It was about enjoying the bikes and really just being out there and taking it for what it was. But he decided to go racing when he could afford to go racing, not on my money.
So where did you start, Shaun? What was your first bike?
PW50, I think.
Right, okay.
So many greats have started on PW50s. So Yamaha PW50. I mean, as Howard said, like, he's always encouraged everybody to try motorcycling. So I was certainly. He wasn't like a pushy parent in terms of like get involved in sport or this, that and the other, but in terms of like having experience in motorcycling, I was exposed to it from a young age. There was pillion behind him, and then was on a bike since the age of 3, so I always had bikes when I was growing up. I was a very fortunate position to be in that, but they were always primarily for fun, around the fields, you know, the local farmers or whatever, or find a bit of old rough ground and all that. I think that's one of the things today that is really clamped down upon now in terms of like being able to have access to motorcycles. Is even if you have one, someone's there willing to tell you where you can and can't ride it and all the rest. And so it very, very lucky that I had those sorts of opportunities when I was young.
Right. So what got you into the racing? Where did that start?
Well, but like everything's sort of sins of the father, so obviously Dad was involved in the racing from a mechanicking point of view, and then also in from the organisational side. So as a child, I was sort of dragged pillar to post from short circuits to road racing. Obviously, road racing is very predominant in Ireland, or it was at one time, and so I grew up as sort of a bit of a paddock brat or whatever you would have. I wasn't directly involved in the racing, but like most weekends throughout the summer was spent in a race paddock somewhere.
Right. So do you get nervous watching the boy?
Not overly, no. And especially, believe it or not, more so at our road races back home till on that first lap or two, because they still should start in a mass start. So until they actually get singling out, your worry, your main concern is that first 3 or 4 corners that nobody else around them does something silly. But other than that, no. I mean, he's a big boy and has been for quite a while now. And I mean, you have to let people live their lives. You know, I don't think in that respect, I might be controlling in so many other ways that he might not, but I mean, I don't think I've never ever said to him, you know, should we try something different, you know? And that's the way I think, and it's the same, I have to say it's the same with my daughter. I mean, you know, they don't listen to me anyway, so what's the point? I mean, it's just kids, you know?
So there's a big tradition of road racing in Ireland. is that almost kind of part of your DNA, really? As you,
I would say like it certainly, like the level of exposure in comparison to like England or Europe or some other countries, like in that way, it certainly makes it normalizes it much more than a lot of other people have that. But I think, you know, road racing in itself is a byproduct historically of young riders getting together and trying to prove something. So in that way, it has always been a good outlet, and a lot of road racers have come from being road bike riders who went from proving something on a Sunday morning to their friends to thinking I can have a go at something that's a bit more organised, maybe a bit more safer and all the rest. So in that way, I guess Ireland in itself has a very strong connection in road racing, maybe in comparison to England, where you only have one or two events at maybe Aberdare in Wales and also Scarborough in the north of England and all the rest. We had multiple, and we all sort of bow down to the Mecca that is the Isle of Man.
Right. So you had a good year this year at the Isle of Man then?
Yeah, so I mean, this year the Isle of Man was very special. It was very good for, I think, everybody. The weather was exceptional for 2 weeks, but we had a particularly good year this year. So we did 6 races, we had 6 starts, we had 6 finishes, a couple of top 10s. Worst positions was 13th, and we managed to crack the 130 mile an hour lap on the big bikes. So I think that puts us in a club of about 24 riders that have done it so far. So very, very special, very, very privileged and very lucky in that way to be able to do it. But yeah, we came back definitely smiling after the TT this year.
Great. So you're talking about 130 mile an hour lap. What are the sort of top speeds that you reach in on a lap like that?
Yeah, so 130 average, and the course itself, the challenge of the course is obviously the distance. It's 37 3/4 miles a lap, but you have everything from first gear hairpins where you're doing less than 30 miles an hour, and then there is sections, 2 or 3 sections where you reach the outright top speed is somewhere in and around between 190 and 200 miles per hour.
Right, because I sit and watch the TT racing on the TV, and to me, as an ordinary motorcyclist, I look at this as insane, because what you guys do is so far beyond anything I could ever imagine doing myself on a motorcycle. Tell me about the safety aspect of the sport and what goes into making sure that it's as safe as possible at those sort of speeds.
Well, I mean, I think from an outsider's perspective, it probably does look a bit like lunacy. So, I mean, people think you get on the bike and you just twist the throttle as hard as you can and you go as hard as you can. But actually, in practice, with a lot of sports or combat sports or motorsports, there's actually a lot of forethought goes into it. And being both a road rider and a road racer, I think you understand and appreciate there is a high risk level because of the high speeds that are involved, but in relative terms, in comparison to like riding home from work, everybody's going in one direction, nobody's on their phone. If there's diesel or gravel on the road, it's either being cleaned up or treated. I have a watcher in so much as the marshals, the Orange Army that support us, are looking through blind corners that I can't see and giving me signals, whether it's a yellow flag for something dangerous, a lack of adhesion flag. So in those ways, the risks are minimized in comparison to a lot of the times to what you would consider like a normal road ride on a Sunday with your friends or a commute to work and all the rest. The risks are lower, obviously, because the speeds are so much higher that if an error occurs, there can be quite drastic consequences of it. But in relative terms, I see it as quite a low risk.
Right, fantastic. So finally, you're both members of the BMF, been for some time. What would you say to people perhaps contemplating joining up? Benefits of the BMF?
Well, I've been a member for very many years now. I'm also obviously on the management team as well, for my sins, quite to some extent by mistake or through just the way circumstances, basically the way things were. But it's something that I believed in, and I mean, even though I'm in Northern Ireland and quite isolated from the rest of the UK, and the membership on this side of the water, which is so much greater. But to me, looking after, I mean, as I say, I have enjoyed motorcycling legally from 16-year-old when I could do the licence back then, and I remember the helmet laws coming in. And to me, I think it's important that we look after the legislation that keeps us on the road for as long as is humanly possible. And if that means in the future hydrogen or electric or whatever the fuel may be, that if I can ride two wheels for as long as I'm ably fit to do it, I'll continue to do so. Simple.
I mean, for me, the BMF, I mean, primarily it used to mean cheaper insurance, and that was a big driver when I was a lot younger and trying to get on the road. But I think there's a sense of community, and I think accessibility. Howard talks about the legislation of being able to try and get on motorcycling, and BMF, between allowing the affiliation of the local clubs and the association with like a lot of schools throughout, there's a strong motorcycling network to allow people either to get into motorcycling, to try and further their own motorcycling, whether it's through like the Blue Ribbon Advanced Rider certification, and having access to like-minded people, and in that way that sense of community reaches across. And obviously at events like this, so we're here at Mallory at the Bikers Bonanza, you feel that, you meet people, you talk to people from different ranges. So obviously I come predominantly from a racing background, but guys who tour, guys who are adventure riders, guys who are commuting, and that sort of sense of community of we're all motorcyclists together, that sort of reaches across in the BMF.
Great. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.